On May 26th, a maid makes a horrific discovery in the Hotel Le Bristol in Paris.
The Hotel Bristol is in the 8th arrondissement of Paris. It's a very grand 5-star hotel.
Around about £1,000 a night to stay there.
The maid was confronted by this bloodbath in the hotel room.
The level of violence indicates she must have suffered greatly during the attack.
There was smashed glass, blood on the floor. Kinga Legg was found naked in a 3/4 filled bath with 100 injuries to her body.
Kinga was actually described as a woman who must have been tortured over a considerable amount of time that evening, resulting in her death.
The actual forensics showed that she had fought for her life.
This is the story of an international manhunt for a ruthless killer.
He left her in a bath, dead, and he was hoping to get as far away from that as possible.
On the 25th of May 2009, a couple on a romantic getaway from Surrey returned to their hotel room at Le Bristol in Paris.
The Bristol Hotel is a luxury 5-star hotel in the 8th arrondissement of Paris, which of course is the city of love.
The Hotel Bristol is within a stone's throw of buildings like the Champs-Élysées and the British Embassy. It's a very exclusive, very, the preserve of the rich and famous and well-to-do, if you like.
Luxury 5-star hotel, around about £1,000 a night to stay there.
But when hotel staff enter the room to clean after their departure, a truly horrifying scene awaits them.
When the maid entered room 503 of that 5-star Bristol luxury hotel, she sees a naked body in the bath, 3/4 filled up, but also heavily blood-stained. She sees the naked body of a female within that bath, which is Kinga Legg.
Police launch their investigation by looking into the background of the deceased 36-year-old woman.
Kinga Legg was from Poland originally, from a very wealthy family, but she'd come over to the UK and she was running the UK part of their family business.
Vegex, which supplied tomatoes to big organisations, Tesco, McDonald's, things like that.
So the tomatoes that you would buy in a supermarket would probably have come from this company, so very, very wealthy.
She was a very driven woman as well, who wanted her own identity, and she was a person that enjoyed life, but was obviously living quite a luxurious life due to the money that she had. Kinga Legg met Ian Griffin, who was a British businessman, in Monaco in 2008, and they hit it off straight away.
Ian Griffin was a kind of an entrepreneur, but perhaps had some delusions of his own success, shall we say. He was somebody that didn't necessarily have a strong track record in business, certainly not the kind of powerful track record that somebody like Kinga Legg had.
He had some tanning salons and some other little businesses, but he certainly wasn't the grand scale business mind that maybe he told people that he was. In fact, what he tended to do is he tended to live off wealthy women.
The newspapers describe him as a businessman. I would describe him as someone who was masking the real truth that was behind what he was wearing and what he was driving. He was driving a Porsche. He met Kinga in Monaco, which is the playground for the wealthy people. So he knew where to pick up women that might potentially be able to buy him his meal ticket.
I think that Kinga's fortune was certainly something that might have attracted him to her.
Ian Griffin was described as a kind of gigolo. He was described as somebody that was effectively incumbent on other people's success to kind of fund his own life and lifestyle, because he liked to boast that he'd had supercars and post pictures of himself with yachts and things like this.
Where Kinga had built up her own portfolio and her own finances as a very driven businesswoman herself, he was very different to that. Most of his money came through his family. He would often ask for money, and that's how he was financing his business and how he was living his lifestyle. Sponging off his parents a little bit, sponging off the money that they had. He wasn't as independent as perhaps you would identify Kinga as being. But nevertheless, they hit it off and formed a relationship.
Griffin really enjoyed the lavish lifestyle that being with Kinga allowed him. So they were renting a £3 million home. And I don't think that he was contributing a great deal to the rent. And then when they went to Paris, they were staying in a €1,000 a night hotel room. So all of the trappings that money can buy, really. They'd met in 2008. And the plan was that they would get married in Monaco. In fact, they would get married in Monaco just a year later, 2009. So it seems like a whirlwind fairy tale relationship, but there's a big fly in the ointment. And the big fly is the fact that throughout all of this time, Griffin has been in a relationship with another woman.
Ian Griffin actually was in another relationship all the time that he was seeing Kinga Legg with Tracy Baker, who was about 34 at the time and was quite a successful entrepreneur, appearing on British television shows.
She had been a contestant on the programme Dragon's Den, and Ballantyne had put 60k into her business. So potentially she was going to be successful. I think he would have known that and again would have been preying on her.
Again, another driven woman who had her own finances. So you could see that Ian Griffin was with people where necessarily he wasn't financing himself, that he was almost looking to these people to be the financial stability in his own life.
When you've got two women and you're promising to marry both of them, at some point something has got to give, hasn't it?
Infidelity was not the only issue going on between the couple.
The relationship between Kinga and Griffin, I think, was incredibly abusive. It's not founded on any reality because, of course, he's in a relationship with another woman all this time. It's founded on lies. Kinga's not aware of this. And according to evidence from Kinga's friends, and in fact from text messages that she sent, even though the relationship is a fairly new one, they should be in honeymoon period, it's becoming violent at times. For whatever reason, Kinga was under his spell.
But it is a pattern that we see in abusive relationships where everything happens pretty quickly. The perpetrator very much will insert himself into the victim's life very quickly. We often call it love bombing. So there can be lots of attention, lots of affection, gifts, spending lots of time together, and then we see the control begin. As a society, we tend to think that especially women who get into abusive relationships don't have resources, are not successful, they are vulnerable, they have issues in their lives. Domestic abuse can affect any woman, whatever their circumstances, whatever their background, and this case highlights that.
A month or so before the murder, there's a particularly chilling incident where Kinga Legg sends a text message to a friend saying,
"If you read this and I'm dead, then I want you to know that it was my partner that did this to me."
French police are now prioritising looking into Ian Griffin as a suspect. They need to find out what really happened in that luxury hotel that night. In May 2009, the body of 36-year-old Polish-born millionaire Kinga Legg is discovered in Le Bristol Hotel in Paris. The young woman had suffered over 100 injuries and was left in a blood-stained bathtub. Police are looking into her boyfriend, Ian Griffin, as a possible suspect, as Kinga had told friends that he had been violent towards her in the past.
Prior to the murder, there were other incidents of violence and coercive control, and Kinga had told her friend that he had beaten her badly once. She had also confided in a friend that he had made her take a lot of medication.
She says that he fed her so many pills that she never knew if she'd even wake up.
That, again, looks like an attempt at murdering her, attempt at perhaps discrediting her, but definitely to control her. And that also speaks of a bit of a practice run.
Kinga's friend also tells police of an incident with Griffin that raises significant alarm bells.
It certainly appears that Ian Griffin was somebody that couldn't control his aggression and that was prone to outbursts of violence.
On one particular time, Ian Griffin drove his Mercedes through the front door of the Oxshott mansion in Surrey. You know, extreme action to take, whatever the circumstances were. Kinga knew that this was quite a violent relationship and also was raising the red flags to her friends, potentially really at a time when she should have got out of the relationship.
This is a woman who is fearing for her life. Now, how he's been able to persuade her that it's a great idea to go away on a romantic break to Paris, I really don't know, but I think that it speaks to the manipulative side of him.
Kinga chose not to report these previous instances of violence to the police in the UK.
It's so difficult for victims to report abuse, to even tell anyone about abuse. And there's many reasons for that. People love their partner because they have fallen in love with the person that was portrayed to them. And he was probably portraying this successful, lovely man that she could have a life with. They were going to be married. You don't switch that off. And all of a sudden, there might have been this change. That's very difficult to come to terms with. It's very confusing. And often, victims will look to themselves. Have I done something wrong? Is it something that I am doing because he wasn't like that before? And often the perpetrator will be saying, this is because you do this is because you do that. So there is this real difficulty and confusion about what's happening, and it makes victims very reluctant to go that step forward and report.
Escalation is quite typical in cases of domestic abuse, because when somebody performs almost their first level of abuse or violence, if that person doesn't leave and there's no reaction and they stay with them, then they kind of see that as as an open door really to continue that kind of abuse. And then it becomes very controlling. It becomes very, coercive, where you can make, you're stopping finances and you're stopping their ability to see people. These are some of the red flags that you will see, where all of a sudden somebody you are close to as a family member is being ostracized from you by the partner that they're with, because that person wants to control them. So that level of escalation will develop in that relationship unless there is any intervention. And if people aren't willing to intervene themselves as family and friends, then bring in the authorities to do it for you.
This was a whirlwind of a relationship. They met in 2008. They were being married in 2009, or so Kinga believed. The fact, of course, that there's another woman who is involved in this.
It was quite a worrying relationship even before we got to that fateful day in 2009.
The pair had gone to Paris, and it's believed they were headed down to the south of France in order to get married. So they'd gone on what should have been a romantic and loving break together.
On Monday, the 25th of May 2009, Kinga Legg and Ian Griffin were in Paris in the five-star luxury hotel, the Bristol Hotel, and they were there for just a short break. But of course, this break then turned into something much more.
The couple reject the first room they are offered, settling on the luxurious suite in room 503.
They have gone out for dinner, as couples do. According to Griffin, and I don't want to put too much stock really on what he says, they had an argument over dinner, and he says that Kinga said to him that he owed her sex. If that was said, I don't know. Perhaps we could say that maybe that's a sign that things were not going well in the relationship. There hadn't been any intimacy recently. But he says that it became an argument, and the argument continued in the hotel room.
People had noticed it. It was obviously loud enough that people, were quite concerned.
There is a very, very violent altercation. It's incredibly violent from the fact that the room and the bed were still covered in blood. There was smashed glass, blood on the floor, blood on the walls. A scene of utter devastation.
A do not disturb sign is put on the room. Ian Griffin has telephoned reception to say, we want to extend our stay. And that's really all that anybody can see at the time who's working in the hotel.
There were witnesses in the hotel that heard arguments and potentially violence, and they actually noted it but didn't do anything about it. I think that is something to do with being in a hotel and not wanting to cause any trouble. And they might put it down to, well, we just heard a certain amount, we're not really sure.
It isn't until the day later, when that extended stay has stopped, that a maid enters the room in order to carry out her duties.
Horrifically for the maid entering the room, she was confronted by this bloodbath in the hotel room, and also by Kinga's body lying lifeless.
Kinga Legg was found naked in a 3/4 filled bath with 100 injuries to her body, 17 different injuries to her head, 33 to her kind of chest and torso area. So a frenzied and very, very violent attack in this room, in this beautiful hotel that was completely desecrated and destroyed by Ian Griffin.
What can also be seen straight away is the extreme chaos and violence which has occurred within that room. And obviously the injuries that were then subsequently found on Kinga show what kind of extreme violence was used behind closed doors that nobody knew about at the time.
There was blood found all over the room. There were signs of a really violent, frenzied struggle.
Police now believe that Ian Griffin is responsible for the merciless attack and murder of his girlfriend, Kinga Legg, but they have still not been able to locate him. The international manhunt is now truly underway. In May 2009, 36-year-old Polish woman, Kinga Legg, was discovered murdered in a blood-stained bathtub of Suite 503 in the 5-star Le Bristol Hotel in Paris. The prime suspect is her boyfriend, Ian Griffin, who has seemingly gone on the run. Both French and English authorities are urgently trying to find him.
Kinga Legg was murdered in a very expensive hotel in Paris. She was found murdered in the bathtub. is fairly common for these kind of murders because it's a way of trying to eradicate forensics.
The room and the bed were still covered in blood. There was smashed glass, blood on the floor, blood on the walls, a scene of utter devastation.
There is now little information really about what happened inside that room at that particular time. But what we do know after that is that the telephone calls made to reception from Ian Griffin asking for an extension to their stay.
In the aftermath of the attack, Ian Griffin made some kind of attempt to clean room 503 at the Bristol.
Griffin spent 6 hours trying to clear up and get rid of the forensics.
And then on his way out of the hotel, he stops to have coffee, and he makes a point of commenting that he's on his own because his partner is upstairs sleeping in bed.
After drinking 3 coffees, apparently, got behind the wheel of his Porsche 911 and drove away from the scene.
She was found after he'd checked out, and she had over 100 injuries to her body. She had bruises from her head to her feet, and particularly around her neck area.
Griffin was a former rugby player, so was therefore a well-built man, and he weighed about 90 kilograms, whereas Kinga was a slim, tall woman who weighed about 51 kilograms. He would have had the upper hand. She wouldn't have stood a chance.
Kinga Legg's autopsy tells a story of the levels of depravity during the attack.
If you can imagine how long it would take you to inflict 100 blows to somebody's body, it shows that consistent violence over time as well, real anger.
Kinga was actually described by somebody who'd seen her as a woman who must have been tortured over a considerable amount of time that evening, resulting in her death.
And the toxicology showed that he had forced about 30 medications down her, including a anti-blood clotting medication, and she did die of internal injuries. Her body wouldn't have been able to clot the blood inside of her.
This is supposed to be the woman that he loved, that he is going to marry, and he left her in a bath, dead. Ian was running from what had happened because he knew what he had done, and he was hoping to get as far away from that as possible. That's what it looks like. And to basically take himself out of the picture of what happened to Kinga.
He himself was now on the run.
Detectives in Paris consider the possibility that Ian has fled to his home in the UK and ask local police to help find him.
Griffin goes straight back to Cheshire, where he's from, and he abandons his Porsche 911 and he goes to live in a far less salubrious address to what he's used to. He actually sets up a tent in the middle of Cheshire.
All in the background of this is a murder investigation, with their suspect being Ian Griffin.
There was an element of premeditation about this murder. Before he went to France, he went to Shepperton Marina. Shepperton Marina was where Griffin had his speedboat, and he had rather conveniently got it made seaworthy, paid £25,000 to get his boat modified so it could go on the sea as well as just rivers. And he also bought nautical charts which pertain to Britain and Europe. Then he went out to Paris. This tells me he had planned that murder and this was going to be his escape route. He might have panicked afterwards and gone back to Cheshire and not gone to his boat because he might have realised that actually police would be aware of that, where he keeps his boat. So perhaps he didn't really think that bit through very well, but it definitely shows premeditated murder. The government in France had to put together a European arrest warrant because essentially he's fled the country.
The teams over there will be working hard to get all the evidence they need to prosecute Ian Griffin for this murder. Their priority will be to get him back over to France. But in order to do that, they have to issue a European arrest warrant. The European arrest warrant, having been issued, is verified in this country as well in the UK, and the police become involved and the courts become involved. And you can only be extradited in this way if there is believed to be sufficient evidence, which would be assessed in the UK, enough for them to then extradite Ian Griffin.
1 week after Kinga's body was discovered in the hotel, the international manhunt comes to an end.
It wasn't until June that Ian Griffin was found hiding in a tent.
While the subject of a European arrest warrant, he was actually camping in a kind of a wooded area near Macclesfield in the northwest of England.
Trying to hide, having dumped his Porsche 911 near where he was from in Cheshire.
And while there was a European arrest warrant out for Ian Griffin and he was detained in England, it was 2011 when he was finally extradited to France, and 2014 before he actually came before the court system.
Bearing in mind that this is somebody who is allegedly shocked and horrified to find out that he's killed his partner, he doesn't intend to take responsibility for it. He's just trying to run away.
Ian Griffin tells investigators his version of events that transpired the night Kinga died.
According to Griffin, they had an argument. He took some drugs, and of course they'd had alcohol with dinner, and he says at that point he mysteriously loses his memory. Now, you can lose your memory if copious amounts of alcohol are involved, or even as a result of the trauma of committing an offence. I don't think it happened on this particular occasion. Griffin's story is that he had woken up from this blackout that he had to find Kinga's body in the bathtub. So the thing to do, of course, would be to phone for help immediately. You would think that this is what somebody would do if they were to find the body of their loved one and not be sure how it happened, but no.
Ian Griffin claimed that he had amnesia, and he claimed that he couldn't remember the attack, which is an absolute lie. And he wasn't going to take any responsibility for it whatsoever, which is typical of a narcissist and someone like him. Griffin said that Kinga fired a stun gun from her lipstick and that she then may have hit her head on something, which then would have caused, he was saying, that blunt force trauma to her head. But the actual forensics and her body showed that she had fought for her life and that there was absolutely no way it was an accident. And I don't believe that she would have had a stun gun. And I find that he claimed incredible things which are outrageous and mendacious, and this is part of him. He is a con artist. Griffin had tried to put the blame on Kinga by saying we were arguing and she said you owe me sex. Now that's not something that I've ever heard come out of any of my clients' mouths when working with victims. In fact, usually it's the other way around. It's something to lead you down another rabbit hole and to try and again put the blame on Kinga. So this is Kinga's fault that she's dead. Nothing to do with me, nothing to see here. I didn't do anything.
He said he blacked out, that he can't remember. But his actions afterwards, everything that he did to conceal it, in my opinion, does not suggest that this was an accident and that he blacked out. And the number of injuries also for me does not suggest that. So something has led to him feeling perhaps that he is losing control here and that he needs to act on that. And that will often, when someone feels like they are losing control, that will lead to a real increase in violence.
The fact that he was making any plans whatsoever other than to telephone the police and to account for himself and what he's done and give Kinga's family the answers that they deserved really shows that he's very self-serving. He's thinking about nothing but himself in amongst this, and he truly believes that he can get modifications made to his boat and then he can sail away into European waters, where of course it's going to be so much harder for him to be extradited back to France. Griffin is a brutal domestic abuser. I don't really know how else to put this. What I do know is that Griffin saw Kinga as a meal ticket in many respects.
Now, prosecutors must prepare for trial. Will Griffin be held accountable for the brutal murder of Kinga Legg and face a life sentence for his actions? The body of 36-year-old Polish-born millionaire Kinga Legg was discovered in a blood-stained bathtub in the luxurious 5-star Hotel Le Bristol in Paris on the 26th of May 2009. Her boyfriend, Ian Griffin, went on the run for nearly a week before being arrested in the UK and charged with her murder.
We already know there's huge barriers in reporting domestic abuse. Barriers that include, will I be believed?